Hi, I'm Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground. Welcome to this week's episode of The Underground, a program that explores the gospel of Jesus Christ, the testimony of the biblical prophets, current events, and how all these things relate to you and me. Now, on this week's program, we are joined by Billy Ray. We've had Billy on before, and we're going to pick up our discussion where we left off. We're discussing some of the things that are unfolding. Billy and his family have been Christian workers working with the refugees in northern Iraq for the past several years. He's been living in the Middle East for the past 13 plus years. And obviously they've kind of been right in the middle, or at least right on the edge of all that's been unfolding the past year and a half with ISIS sweeping across Iraq. So I want to sort of jump right into a little bit of some of the geopolitical things that are unfolding throughout the region, because these things have implications not only with regard to the potential fulfillment of biblical prophecy. I mean, obviously the Middle East, it's always, does this relate to what the Lord said would happen, and this sort of thing, but really with regard to the gospel, the completion of the Great Commission, the going forth of the gospel in that region. So, Billy, thanks so much for coming back to join us again.
Great to be with you, Joel.
Yeah. So listen, for most people, the Middle East, it's just a confusing, chaotic mess. You've got all these different tribes, different ethnicities, different sects of Islam, and different, groups like the Yazidis and the Druze and the Alawites and the Alawis, and, who are all these different, groups and so forth. And so it can be an imposing matter to try to take on, to understand what's going on. American foreign policy. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? But let's just begin. You've been working among the Kurdish people. So first, just start out. Tell our viewers, who are the Kurdish people, a little bit about their history, and then just touch on how you came to be, or how you felt called to begin working among the Kurds.
The Kurds, many historians might tell you that the Kurds are the ancient Medes. In the Bible, it talks about the Medes and the Persians. In the book of Daniel, it talks about Darius the Mede. And this would have been a direct descendant of the Kurds today. At some point, about 2,600 years ago, there was their religion was formed as more of a Zoroastrian originally, and then later, in the time of Muhammad, it became Islamic. And there's a split at that time as well in the Kurdish tribes, with the Yazidis being the ones that did not convert to Islam and are the what some people say are the original Kurds today. We really just felt called to minister in that geographic area back in 2007. God just placed a burden on my heart for the plight of the orphan in northern Iraq. And as a response to that call, we hooked up with World Orphans and moved over there as a family in 2008.
Obviously, for those that have been around long enough, so you go to Iraq in 2008. The Gulf War II, sort of the American invasion of Iraq and the fall of Saddam Hussein. What year was that?
Well, the first Gulf War was in 90-91 mainly, and then you had the 2003, the Operation Freedom. I can't remember. Anyway, that was the one that we all remember, and that basically started closing out about 2011.
So really, you went there in the midst of, the American involvement in Iraq is 5 years, along the line. Saddam was gone. The country's fallen back to some of the sectarian alignments that would have existed really, I guess, before Saddam, because Saddam being Sunni, the majority of Iraqis there in the south around Baghdad being Shia, Shia being the minority sect, let's say 14% of the Islamic world, the Sunnis, the majority sect, maybe 86, somewhere around there. But Saddam being a Sunni, he really had his boot sort of on the neck of the Shia. And then with him being removed, with the Americans having removed Saddam Hussein, the dictator, suddenly the Shia rise up as the majority. And so much of the southern part of the country, as well as the capital, Baghdad, is now controlled by the Shia. And thus, in many ways, they are sort of beholden to some degree to Iran, because Iran is Shia, obviously a Shia imamate, I guess you would call it, or I'm not sure exactly what they would call their government, but it's run by the Ayatollahs, which is clearly, a Shia form of government, religious government. And so, things sort of shifted in that direction. But there in the north, the Kurds are overwhelmingly Sunni, correct? Right. So now, obviously, and way back when, in the midst of this, I remember Joe Biden saying that perhaps we should partition Iraq into three different, sections, where you would have the Kurds, the Sunni Arabs, and then the Shia in the south. So really, this sort of Kurdish region in the north, because their people are ethnically Kurds, that's different than the Arabs, but they are Sunni Muslim. But is it just me, or do the Kurdish people generally tend to be much more moderate compared to many of the Arab Sunnis? Or is that just my perception?
Yeah, there's a huge distrust between the Arabs and the Kurds, vice versa. Of course, Saddam was trying to exterminate them in the late 80s and 90s. So, but to answer your question, I think the Kurds, they are generally Islamic. They're a Muslim group, but they also hold their nationality, I would say, higher than Islam. And if you just look at their own history, and you can understand why, because Turkey, also Muslim, Iran, Muslim, Syria, and southern Iraq, Muslim, all of them have been persecuting the Kurds for decades. So that has a way of jarring loose kind of maybe the fundamentalism So, I mean, there is fundamentalisms too among the Kurds, but, we're talking 10% or less.
So now, of course, there's this famous saying, the Kurds have no friends but the mountains. And of course, as we discussed last time you were here, the Kurdish north, the Kurds live in the mountains. And so the idea is that the mountains themselves are the only things that have really protected the Kurdish people. As you said, they've been persecuted by the Persians, they've been persecuted by the Arabs, by the Turks, by the Syrians. And because of that, that's really formed their sense of identity, and it's really, their Kurdish identity has sort of risen to the top, and at times is even stronger than the Islamic identity, so to speak. But what was so here you are, American Westerners looking at this, and they're saying, here's an American that's moved with his family into a Kurdish region. He's openly a Christian. And what was the reception of the Kurdish people when you came? Share with folks, the story of how you came to meet sort of the governor of the region, and how you were treated and received.
Yeah, Joel, I mean, we came to help, and we just told them up front. I had like you said, I had a meeting with the governor of the Saran region. I just told him very clearly, I said, the reason that we're here is because we're followers of Jesus Christ. He's the one that died on the cross for the sins of all the world. And as followers of him, we feel obligated to serve your people, regardless of their ethnic background, their religious, what religion they're from, or even their political affiliation. And the governor just looked at me and he said, Billy, we know this message well. We'll make sure that your project is successful, because we need more projects like yours in our region. And really, we were the first Western families to live in this area of northern Iraq in its history, and to bring also, just needed humanitarian aid and development into that region. So it was yeah, I mean, we just came with our hands open, tried to be very honest with who we were, and they've openly received us. And not only that, they granted us large portions of land to build refugee camps and to build our community center and things like that.
I mean, that just breaks the stereotype for a lot of Americans. They just think if you're an American Christian moving to any part of the Islamic world, impossible. They're just going to behead you immediately. And this there's dangers and risks no matter where you live in the world. I mean, in the United States, there's risks. But this very hospitable people, my experience, and although extremely brief, when we were in the markets, if I wanted, some bread or a piece of fruit, and I went to buy something, they wouldn't accept my money. They would just say, "Oh, no, 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 no," and they would just insist that I took it as a gift. And I was trying to, almost throw my money at them, saying, "No, I'm happy to pay for some," and they were just so happy and so receptive to Americans being there, that's just a very different picture, I think, than what most Americans or Christian Americans are going to picture. And I found them just to be incredibly warm, hospitable, and I can see why you're in love with the Kurdish people.
Yeah, I mean, most of my all of my staff are Kurdish Muslims. They've sacrificed with me in helping the refugees. My main backer is a Muslim businessman in the country who's fronted me huge amounts of money in order to build the refugee camps. I couldn't have done it, without them. They've trusted me implicitly, welcomed me into their homes. I totally just feel at home among the Kurds.
In 2014, ISIS brought terror to Iraq. Millions of people have been displaced and have run for their very lives. There are massive camps that are overrun with people with sanitation issues, health concerns, both physical and emotional, and there's no one to care for the individual needs of each person. There has to be a better way. How can we better care for refugees? Well, this is how the Refuge initiative is responding. Firstly, we build micro-camps, self-governed, allowing family groups to stay together in a village-style setting with home units, kitchens and bathrooms. Secondly, we provide holistic care. That includes trauma counselling, community support and spiritual care. And thirdly, we equip refugees with pathways back to independence, including education, vocational training and job creation. These are not your ordinary refugee camps. We are building communities of hope. Sponsor a refugee today and welcome someone home.
For this week's program, we are offering the Gospel in the Last Days bundle. This important resource bundle includes the following 6 resources. Joel's newest book, When a Jew Rules the World, What the Bible Really Says About Israel and the Plan of God. This powerful resource addresses all of the critical issues relating to Israel in the unfolding plan of God, exposes the errors of replacement theology, preterism, and the anti-Semitism that is now exploding across the earth. Second, you will receive the documentary film, Better Friends Than Mountains, a film about ISIS, the Kurdish people, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. This beautifully made film will inspire and move you to learn what the Lord is doing right now in one of the world's most active crisis zones. Finally, you will receive 4 copies of Dear Muslim Friend. This highly recommended book answers all of the primary objections to biblical faith commonly brought up by Muslims. Not only is this a critical book for all Christians, but it was specifically created to give away to Muslims. Together, these 6 items are valued at over $60, but when you purchase all 6 items at the discounted rate of only $50, you help support this ministry. Go to joelstrumpet.com and order the Gospel in the Last Days bundle.
So now I want to touch on a little bit of sort of what's unfolding, what has unfolded, just in these past few months. So we were in Turkey several weeks ago, and when we were in Turkey, there was the first really newsworthy incursion of ISIS into Turkey. There was an attack on a Kurdish village. And at least from what I read, there was a gathering in Turkey of some of these Kurdish activists. And ISIS came across the border, attacked and killed several Kurds. And so, what was the reaction of Turkey? But to actually, this was only just a couple days later. I think it was actually the day that we were landing back in the States, but they started bombing northern Iraq, fairly close actually to where you live and where we were when we were there. So tell a little bit about that, how that unfolded and how that's being received now, at least, with regard to the folks that you've talked to up in that area.
Yeah, first of all, Joel, that is one of the most terrible suicide bombings I've ever, I've ever seen, or ever even read about. What happened was all of these Kurdish students had come and gathered. They were about to walk across the border to Kobani in Syria to help rebuild, and they were all lined up. Hundreds of these Kurdish youth were lined up, and they were doing a photo op. They had their banner and they were chanting. They're saying, "We're going to rebuild Kobani. We're going to rebuild Kobani." And suddenly, an ISIS sympathizer had snuck into the middle of their group and just exploded their suicide vest. So it was, you can see it actually. You can see it online. The explosion, everything. It was a photo. It was. I can't imagine a more impacting display of gruesomeness. And I mean, if suicide bombers are tried to be, the most lethal, but this was just over the top because it was actually filmed live, and it was just so devastating. I felt it in the core of my being, and immediately, like you said, Turkey's main response was to go after the Kurdish. The Kurdish rebels that live in northern Iraq. Those planes immediately started flying over our homes in northern Iraq because they're actually southeast of where we are. So the Turkish jets flying over our house now to bomb those areas.
Right. So Rawanduz, the Kandil Mountains, am I pronouncing that right? Kandil? So this is an area where, we were pretty much right there, ministering to some of the Yazidis that had been living in that area. And I mean, again, just stunning beauty. But then when the dust settles and the reporters come in, Turkey had basically bombed, at least by all external evidences, a civilian village, claiming to bomb some of the PKK, the Kurdish separatists or militants or whatnot. What did you see? I mean, did it seem like there was evidence that it was PKK, or did it seem like they're just sort of sending a message and dropping some bombs on some mountain villages?
Well, Joel, it wasn't just, one-off thing. They haven't stopped bombing that area, and they're still bombing, it's been at least 40 days, I think, since that bombing in Suruc. So they've been bombing that area, also bombing the areas just across the border in southeast Turkey in the Hakkari province area. There aren't that many states out there that bomb their own people or that cloister a whole town. What nations do that in the world today? We call them our NATO ally, and this is the kind of behavior that they exhibit. It's just atrocious.
Yeah, and so when people say, well, why is Turkey bombing the Kurds? Essentially, I mean, in a nutshell, you've got a massive Kurdish population in Turkey, primarily in the eastern provinces. And of course, the Kurds for so long have desired their own state, their own nation. And so because of the Turkish nationalism that is so strong in Turkey, this sort of dream and this vision of expanding and reviving the Turkish Ottoman Empire, at the very least preserving the Turkish Republic, they're actually treating the Kurds as though they are more significant terrorists than even ISIS. And so really just sort of the hypocrisy of the Turkish government, it's so transparent. And as you said, they continue to be treated like they are our respectable allies. And it is just atrocious. Now, let me just ask you this. Being where you are, is there any concern that some of the Turkish bombings could actually affect the city or the town or the village that you're in, or is it primarily rural villages? Or, how is it in terms of if you want to move your family, to northern Iraq, what's the danger level right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most jarring thing I could say is just, we're more afraid of the Turkish military than we are of ISIS. Absolutely. And they're indiscriminate bombing, just within probably, 25 miles of where we live. And it's just bone jarring callousness. I just don't know. I mean, we experienced it when we lived in Turkey as well. The fascism spirit that is there is the scariest thing I've ever faced in my life.
Yeah, I like that you use that term fascist, because this is really the comparison that I've made. And again, Americans have a hard time grasping this, but the combination of Islamism, which is strong, but really even more so, is the Turkish nationalism. Yeah. And sort of even this cult of personality that revolves around the president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and his prime minister now, Davutoglu. They seem to be sort of this, formed this partnership with the goal of ultimately establishing Erdogan as the sort of the president for life, or at least for the next foreseeable future. And whether or not he'll be able to pull that all off is yet to be seen, but he's shown himself to be a profoundly residual, emerging dictator. But it really does have some profound similarities to the fascism of Nazi Germany. And, I interviewed a friend that had spent many years in Turkey, very fluent in Turkish. He's now in Cyprus. And, he said Turkish Islam, what's going on right now under the AK party, he said it's more dangerous than Nazism, because they're drawing from that long history of Islam. Nazism was purely just sort of a one-off German nationalism, but Turkish nationalism sort of roots itself in this Islamic ideal, and it meshes that with that Ottoman idea that they, are the best form of Islam, that they can represent Islam the best, and that sort of it would be a gift to the Middle East to expand Turkish power throughout the region. And I really think the world needs to wake up to the danger that's emerging over the past 10 years in Turkey. And I know you probably don't want to say too much to sort of indict yourself, but I mean, I know that you've been observing that as well. And it's, again, something that most Americans really haven't caught up to yet.
Yeah, we have to watch our mouths these days. But I mean, definitely this man in leadership in Turkey scares me more than anything I've seen in the Middle East.
And now even you were, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, but you were initially invited to help the Kurdish government to rebuild Kobani in Syria. This is the village right on the edge of Syria and the Turkish border that was devastated by ISIS, as Turkey sat back and allowed it to happen. But really the biggest roadblock to that seems to be the Turkish government. What's the status of Kobani in the near future? How are things looking for Kobani?
Yeah, I mean, that bombing in Suruc, that basically guaranteed any kind of relief efforts hitting Kobani. I moved it back probably years. I don't see an opportunity working in Kobani in the near future. And that really breaks my heart, because I did walk those streets and I saw the people moving back in by the thousands. One of the questions no one's asking is why this sudden rush of all of the Syrians into the West, into Europe. And I think one of the big reasons is primarily because of that bombing and Turkey's reaction, because you had 2 million refugees living in Turkey. So 2 million Syrian refugees were living in Turkey. With that bombing and with Turkey's response to Kurds, the message got out. They're not safe. Kurds are not safe, and the refugees aren't safe inside Turkey. And so they've been making these risks to jump in those little inflatable dinghies and try to float over to Greece and to get out of the country. They realize that it's not just ISIS they're running from the Turkish government and those elements of fascism that they feel, just pointing straight at their hearts.
Let me just sort of wrap up by saying thank you so much, Billy, for serving, really for, taking risks that a lot of American Christians are not willing to take. And I know that, your reward awaits you guys. And I do hope I get a chance to come and spend some more time with you. But, just ask for everyone who's watching, just ask for your prayers to cover these servants as they're serving and imitating Christ by serving others, and just in real practical humanitarian ways, and sharing the gospel along the way. And I just want to honor you. And again, thank you for thanks so much for coming on. Hope that we have a chance to chat some more in the future, and hopefully to hear some good testimonies of awesome stuff that's unfolding with all that you guys are doing.
Yeah, this is the time for the church to shine, and I really believe that.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, I mean, as things continue to sort of unravel around the world, so to speak, we have an option. We can look at these things through the lens of fear and say, oh no, how is this going to affect me? What should I be scared of? Or we can see them as moments of opportunity. And I'm convinced that both now and in the days ahead, as crisis increases and explodes across the earth, that if we will see these things as opportunities to lay down our lives, opportunities to share the gospel, opportunities to bear witness concerning the nature of Christ and what he has done for the whole world, then we'll see tremendous fruit. But we need to step up. We need to seize the opportunity. So folks, I want to thank you so much for being with us this week. Look forward to seeing you next week. I'm Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground.
Wow.